Good afternoon. I am Elizabeth Alexander, president of the Mellon Foundation. I would like to begin by saying hello to all of you who are scrolling through the chat. It is amazing to see how many of you there are and how many places you are watching from. And so I invite everybody to do the same if you haven't already. We would like to know who you are. We would like to know where you are. And we would, as the conversation goes on, love to take your questions. It is really energizing now, as always, to see the exchanges and the new connections that are made through the chat during our Mellon events. So we hope you'll continue to engage. It is now my great pleasure to welcome you to our program, Telling the American Story on Our Public Lands, with our very special guest, the 54th United States Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland. Public lands in our country are places where many of us go to experience the wonders and beauties of the natural world and where many of us live. They are also sites of memory, history, culture, and sites of learning. They are places where our American story is told and retold, where the history of our people and the landscapes that continue to shape them are shared with visitors from across the United States and around the world. Our public lands are sometimes contested spaces where multiple histories are held in simultaneity and where multiple voices have sought to tell different stories of who we are and who we have been as Americans. How can we ensure that our public lands convey our truest and most inclusive collective history? And how can we protect and maintain broader access to the stories and experiences they hold for future generations? These are some of the questions that inform our conversation today. Our guest, Secretary Haaland, has had a remarkable journey to the role she now holds, including her time as an English major at the University of New Mexico, where she studied with and wrote a poem that would be published by U.S. Poet Laureate Joy Harjo, someone who we share and hold in common as a tremendous inspiration. She then earned a JD in Indian law, also at UNM, and worked in the fields of business management, tribal administration, and community development before entering her first political post in 2015. She served in the United States Congress as a representative for New Mexico before she was appointed to her current post by President Biden in 2020. As the leader of the United States Department of the Interior, Secretary Haaland is a member of the U.S. Cabinet, reporting to the President on matters pertaining to federal land, natural resources, and indigenous affairs. A member of the Laguna Pueblo tribe, she is among the first Native American women to serve in the United States Congress, and she is the first Native American to serve as a cabinet secretary. She is someone I admire tremendously for her wide-ranging intelligence, her human connection, and the incredible sense of ethics, justice, and wisdom that animates her work. Secretary Haaland, we welcome you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's really wonderful to see you.
And I've been excited for this conversation for some time. So to start, I would love for you to tell us a bit about the Department of the Interior. I certainly think of it as something that we know it's there, but not everybody understands its work and purpose in our country.
Exactly. Well, I mean, our mission, in a nutshell, is to manage our public lands and to preserve our cultural heritage for the American people. We also have the obligation to uphold our trust and treaty obligations to our nation's 574 federally recognized tribes. The Department of the Interior didn't always, house the things that we're doing now. It originally, Indian Affairs, I should say, was actually in the Department of War at one time. And so I feel that we've come a long way as a country. We put a value on our public lands. Our public lands belong to every single American. And We are honored every single morning we wake up, and I think I can speak for me and the 65,000 plus career staff and all of the folks who are here because President Biden appointed us, that we wake up every single day honored to serve that mission, to make sure that we're managing our public lands, that we are doing what we can to lift up our wildlife, protect our ecosystems, regenerate landscapes, and make sure that we have a future for our grandchildren here.
Mm-hmm. And then how do you think about our public lands as storytelling spaces and about the Department of the Interior and its role in multiple American stories and storytelling? Why is it important that our public lands are places where we can learn fuller and more accurate American stories? And so just for everyone, I say the American story, I mean our American stories, because there is always that multiplicity.
Absolutely. And we do say that it's our job to tell America's story, the good, the bad, the ugly, if you will. When I think of, and there's many facets, right? Recently, we finished publishing the second volume of our boarding school initiative report. We've also had opportunities. President Biden recently, for example, signed a proclamation to make the Springfield race riots part of the National Park Service units. So we have a history that belongs to every American. Whether you were there and experienced the Springfield race riots, or whether your ancestors were sent to one of our nation's over 400 boarding schools in this country to try to assimilate Native Americans into mainstream society, that history belongs to you. It's our history as Americans. And so I feel really honored that we have the opportunity to make sure that we are convening the folks who can help us understand those stories. These stories have to be told from the lens of the people who experienced those times. And so when we turn to the African American community in Tulsa, they deserve to have a seat at the table when we're talking about how this proclamation should be written and what it should contain, and how we should honor the people whose lives were cut short because of racism in this country. And so in that regard, we also have some really beautiful, iconic places, right? The Grand Canyon. I'm sitting here in Arizona today. Nobody comes to Arizona without thinking, or at least visiting, or at least thinking about the Grand Canyon. But I also, there are iconic places that we now honor and adore. So many of our nation's national parks were ancestral homelands to Native American tribes. Many times Native communities were pushed off of those lands so they could make room for a national park. So we always have to remember that there's a backstory to so many things. And while we can enjoy the beauty of America's national parks or wildlife refuges or BLM lands, that we also should think about the deep story behind those things, and who lived there before, who lived there before this was a country, and how did they steward these lands? And we're here because of our original stewards. So those are the things that we are hoping to make sure that we're helping people to think about, right? Because we're all Americans and we all have to honor our past.
And how do you, to give us a sense of some of the teaching tools, didactic tools that you and your folks have at your disposal, what are some of the different forms of storytelling and information sharing? Because it's not just plaques, it's not just statues, there are many different forms.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, technology plays such a large role in how we're getting information across to visitors. But yes, you know, you can go to any national park and there's a sign, or there's a, you know, there's a sign or some sort of information that you can take away, knowing, you know, what wildlife is there, or what, you know, how the land itself was formed. But certainly, technology plays a very large role. We have interpreters out there who work on our public lands, who really find the best way to connect with people. It's really that we want folks to get the most out of their visits to any public land that they would go to. Sometimes, you know, families will, that might be the only vacation they're able to take their family on, and we want them to make the most out of it. But I feel honored that because of the opportunities we've also had with Indian tribes at co-stewardship, co-stewarding some of our public lands. Oftentimes you might see some indigenous language signs, or you might have translations of what this particular place means and why it's important to the indigenous people whose maybe ancestral homelands we happen to be on at the time. So it's really just fulfilling our obligation to steward these lands in a respectful way. I will also say that we're also reminding folks to visit with respect, right?
Yeah.
And to think about what era we're in. We're in a climate crisis at the moment. And so we want folks to know and understand why it's important that we don't want you to walk in a certain place, or that we don't want you to touch something, because you know, these things are important and they're put there for a reason. We want to preserve and protect this cultural heritage that belongs to all Americans.
How you became secretary, how did you strategically think about, you know, this enormous set of responsibilities and some of the things that you wanted to move forward, you know, on the front end? How did you think about that, especially as regards storytelling, but in general as well?
Sure. Well, of course, I'd never been a secretary before. So, you know, you get to the office and you think, oh my goodness, this is big. I have 65,000 plus career staff that I have to worry about now. You know, I have a wonderful team, and I'll tell you what, I really operate as a team. I don't think I never have to be the smartest person in the room. There are career staff who've been at the department for decades and decades. I love taking advice and ideas from folks who are on the ground. We have, you know, nothing in this country is a monolith. Every single location is different. It has a different history. It has a different geological formation. It has different water resources. Every place is different. And so when we have these folks working on the ground who see these locations every day, it's important that we listen to them and take from them what they know and understand to be true about the land and the resources there. And so I really, you know, want everyone to know that I am so proud to be part of a team, to be part of a really amazing team here at the department, and that, you know, not one person is responsible for how we steward these lands or make decisions about the priorities that we want to set forth. We're very fortunate that President Biden, the Biden-Harris administration, has done an amazing job of giving us resources through some of the laws that have been passed for landscape restoration, for native language preservation, for you know, things that we can see tangible differences in. And so I'm grateful that we've been able to really move some projects forward and make sure that things are done in the correct way.
Yeah, you know, I'm thinking about you just mentioned native language preservation, and I'm thinking about that vis-a-vis my earlier question about the different forms of the work that you and your team do. Could you tell us more about that?
I'm sorry, about what?
Native language preservation?
Native language yes. I beg your pardon. Yes, native language preservation, revitalization. The Biden-Harris administration has been very supportive of this. In particular, I will say that Dr. Jill Biden, she's an educator. She has been also a champion of native language preservation and revitalization. One of the things that I feel very committed to is ensuring that we can move funding for this area forward. When we did our Road to Healing as part of the boarding school initiative, one of the main things that came out from every single location that we visited was that language, the loss of language was a real issue because of children being taken away from their communities and sent to Indian boarding schools. People would say, I didn't lose my language, it was stolen from me. This is the sentiment across Indian country. That was the one thing they really had in common. So many places were different, but so we are committed. That's part of the healing process. We are committed to supporting native language revitalization, but making sure that it comes from the tribes. The First Lady and I had a chance to visit the Cherokee Immersion School in Oklahoma, the Cherokee Nation Immersion School. And they have a school that is taught in Cherokee from the time the children are in preschool, I think, all the way up to graduating from high school. They were working on a cultural center where they could pair up elders with youth so that they can learn the language directly from elders as well. And so these are all ways that we can support tribes in their efforts to preserve their language. But I want to emphasize that it's incredibly important for the tribes to make these decisions on their own. They know their communities best. They know who are native language speakers and how they can go about ensuring that people can learn the language. I myself don't speak fluent Karis. I wish I did. My mother didn't teach us because she had gone to boarding school, and there was an amount of fear of her, her teaching us our language. She wanted to make sure that we were fluent in English because that is what we would be, how we would be learning through our public education. So I am fully supportive of this area, and I think it would enrich our country to have native language speakers know and understand. Because when you know your native language, it's directly connected to the geography, right? There's certain colors. Somebody might have a color in their language that is specific to a certain mesa or a flower that blooms at a certain time. These are all things that are directly related to the geography, to the seasons, to the wildlife. It's a full picture of who Indigenous people are. And when the children have opportunities to learn their language and have that full picture of who they are and where they come from, their lives are richer. They can learn better. They understand the world from their perspective, and it just makes for better communications all around. So we're proud of the support that we've been able to give tribes, and we just hope that we can continue it.
Beautiful, beautiful. I would love to hear some more and learn some more about what I'll call your leadership journey. And you've had a wide-ranging career, one that took you down numerous paths: law school, business management, community development, a love of the arts before being elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. How do you like to tell the story of your leadership journey? Because as we also know, it's not just about the job titles, right? It's how a life unfolds. I would love to hear more about that from you.
Well, thank you so much. Of course, anyone's journey, I think, starts in the home that you're raised. And my dad was a career Marine. He was a combat Marine in Vietnam. My mother, they met while my mother was in the Navy. He was in the Marines. My mom was in the Navy. They met at Treasure Island in San Francisco. They were both stationed there. My mother later went to the Bureau of Indian Affairs and became a 25-year career employee there. So I was raised by two public servants who cared deeply about the communities where they lived. My dad was a Silver Star Medal winner in the Marine Corps. He saved the lives of 6 Marines, and to earn that medal. And so I have deep respect for the people who serve our country in that way. My parents, they never coddled us or anything like that. We had to work hard from the time we were kids. And so you just learn that you're part of a team right away, right? My mother, we had all our chores and we even though it was summer vacation for so many kids, they'd be outside playing, we'd be inside cleaning. It was a life that sometimes you felt like, why do I have to do this? But as I look back on what the things that my mother taught me, I'm very grateful. I know how to cook. I know how to clean. I know how to make all of our traditional foods from Laguna because of the values that my mother instilled in me and her ability to teach us what we needed to know to grow up to be Pueblo women. And so I start there. As I became older, I felt very committed to ensuring that the Native voice was one that was heard. So I set out to register every single Native American in New Mexico to vote. I went around to every Native community for many election seasons, registered people to vote, went back again, make sure they had rides to the polls. I just felt very committed to ensuring that we had people in office who cared about us and who shared values with me. And so that went on for a long time before I decided that perhaps I could run for office. I decided to put my hat in the ring for lieutenant governor in 2014. Won my primary. It wasn't a difficult one, I'll admit that. Even though the governor candidate and I didn't win that year, I decided I would lead our party. And so I ran for the state chair of the New Mexico Democratic Party. And so, whenever I've had opportunities in positions such as that, I just do what needs to be done. If the bathroom needed cleaning at the office, I cleaned it. If the floor needed to be swept and mopped, I swept and mopped it. I feel like if you are part of a team, then, no job should ever be beneath you. You should always be willing to do what needs to be done. And so I feel, and because of that, I have tremendous respect for every single job that every single person has, right? We're a country that operates because all of us are working together. Not one person can do any one thing. And so I've always felt very positive that it's because of all of us working our separate jobs and being dedicated to those that we can make things operate in a good way and provide a future for our families and communities. During the time I was chair, our Congresswoman, who is now our governor, decided to step down and run for governor. And so it left a congressional seat open. And then I decided that I would run for office. Not because I felt like I necessarily wanted to be a congresswoman, but more so because I feel representation matters. There had never been a Native American woman in the House of Representatives in our country since the beginning of Congress. It was like 233 years. We had not had a Native American woman in Congress. And so if I just have always felt like if something needs to be done, that I should, and I have the ability to step up and do it, that I should. So I decided to run for Congress in 2018. And I was blessed to have Sharice Davids from the Ho-Chunk Nation also run and win her election. So there were two of us, which was really nice. I didn't have to carry that mantle all by myself. So kind of the rest is history. When President Biden called me and asked me to serve in this capacity, I had to write down what I would say to him because I felt so nervous about it. But there again, representation matters. We'd never had a Native person, man or woman, in any cabinet position prior to this. And so I just felt it was a tremendous opportunity for me to bring a different perspective to the federal government. I can remember being in my grandmother's village of Mesita as a kid and having the commodities truck come through. It would park almost in front of her house, and she would send us out to get a box of whatever they would give us. Beans, a can of tomato sauce, flour, lard, whatever it was, they handed food out to the people of the village. And I just remember thinking, it was just, as I became older, it made me think, right, our lives had been intertwined with the federal government for so long. My grandparents were taken from their communities at 8 years old and sent to boarding school. The federal government had made so many decisions for me, for my mom, for my grandparents, for my ancestors, and never had we had a seat at the table. And so I was honored to have President Biden ask me to serve as secretary, and I've been proud to have the opportunity ever since. But certainly the perspective that Indigenous people bring to any table, any decision-making table, is incredibly important. And so I feel like President Biden has really lived up to his promise to have his cabinet and his government look like America.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned several times, and I really want us to get in depth. Our two institutions partnered around the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative, which you created and have led for the past 3 years. And so to tell our viewers a little bit more, from the early in the 19th century through late in the 20th, and you talk about your parents, the United States supported Indian boarding schools that forcibly removed Indigenous children from their families and communities and attempted to erase their Native identities. These children were forced to take on English names, sometimes called by numbers, forbidden from speaking their own languages, forbidden from engaging in their own Native religious and cultural practices. Many of these children were abused, and some ultimately died. And your initiative reckons very directly with the legacy of this cruel and destructive institution, and brings clearly to light the traumas that were endured, and I think lays bare the intergenerational impacts that are still experienced in Indigenous communities throughout the country today. I would love you to explain in some further detail about the initiative and some of its particular elements that it's working to immediately resolve, and with what tools. And in the context of this incredibly important and overdue reparative work, how has the department, or is the department, creating some lasting change?
Yes, thank you. Well, um, when we talked about and thought about what we would do for this boarding school initiative, it became apparent that nothing had ever been done. And so it was almost like nobody knows about this. And so we needed to present it to the country with all the facts, right? All the facts that we could find. So in the first volume, we set out to list every single boarding school, how many students were there, what tribes they came from, what their ages were, all of this information that if you went out and told somebody this is what happened in American history, half the people I speak to, they never even knew about Indian boarding schools. And so it would be difficult for people to even believe that this happened in our country. So we lay out all the facts. The first volume comes out, and then we decide, what should we do? One of the things we felt very strongly about is that Indigenous people deserve to have a voice in how this affected them. And that's where the Road to Healing idea came about, that we should travel around the country to each, we kind of divided it by BIA regions for just to make it easier to navigate. And when we called the host tribe, where we would have a Road to Healing event, we left it up to them to offer ideas of how they wanted to do it. Who they wanted to have for a color guard. Did they want an opening prayer? Did they want songs sung or dances danced? How did they want us to, where did they want us to stand and sit? And, we just felt like it was up to them how they wanted to manage these sessions. But as it turned out, that was, we traveled we went on 13, I believe, Road to Healing events across the country. And we heard some of the most disturbing and sad stories that you could ever imagine. I remember a session in Alaska where this elderly woman came with her daughter and stood up and told her story. And now you have to know that some of these folks had never spoken in public before. They had never stood to tell this part of their life. These were memories that they perhaps had repressed for decades and decades. And I remember this woman standing up and telling part of her story, and her daughter standing up after her in tears, saying, "I never knew that my mother went through this. She never talked about this with me." But it was important for the mother to make sure that the daughter was there, right? It was, yes. And sometimes it was a family affair. You could see families sitting together in the group, holding hands or lifting each other up or making sure that they were going through this together. So it was really eye-opening. I had talked with my grandmother about her experiences. And so I kind of had an idea of what I would hear. And it was really sad. So the second, and then after that, of course, we had the second volume, the second report come out, and that gave more details about the funding, right? How much money did the federal government invest in breaking up families and tearing people apart from their communities? How much money did the federal government spend to eradicate Native language, culture, and tradition? So that was an important piece also to reckon with. Also in volume 2, we made some recommendations that we felt could help heal from this tragic era of our American history. And so we are, I guess you could say we're in phase 3 now, working on how we can move these recommendations forward. Native language revitalization is one of the recommendations. So, and plus the oral history project that we're working on. Before we finish, though, Elizabeth, I would love to hear you, because I know you've been such a support of us, and we're so grateful for the Mellon Foundation's true interest in moving this project forward. And I haven't had a chance to chat with you about this, but I would love to hear from you also how you are feeling about the work that you are helping us to achieve.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, I think that, I was, when you first told me about the listening sessions, and, what I remember is that also they took the time they needed to take. Right? I mean, you talked about, working with folks for them to say what kind of color guard this and that, but that also the storytelling and the communal time took the time it needed to take. And I think that sometimes that, and what I think is just so powerful, is that we can go to memorializing before we've done that first line human community work of saying this happened here. And now in this context, it can be spoken that the word, if you will, the word in community, the word in human beings being spoken and held is what is the only thing that enables the next stage, that is the more permanent record, the stories and things that are now available, the reports, and also whatever else may come. I mean, I think that bringing these stories up, and as you say, so many people didn't know about them. I think how people who weren't involved will reckon with that history, how they will interpolate it into their understanding of place, of land, of history. And, I'm also always wanting to see what poets and what other artists in their roles of history keeping and the alchemical transformation of one human's story into art that is part of how it's carried forward. I think we don't know what that will look like, but that can't happen before the kind of the brilliance, I think, of saying we just can't skip over this human community step.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
And also just, yeah. And I think that also, you are not the only messenger, but you are such a crucial messenger who has put this work in the forefront that enables us to understand the long healing journey in all of our American history, right? Because there are so many others. I mean, we're talking about these Native stories. You mentioned Tulsa, Japanese American internment camps, stories of violations to the land itself. American history is not only, if you will, these stories of violence and terror, but we can't act like it didn't happen. And there is a way, people have kept a way to tell these stories and let them move us all forward in, accepting and living within a more complex American history.
Yes.
So that's why I love what you're doing. That's why I love what
Thank
you're
you.
doing.
We love that you love what I'm doing. Thank you for all of your support. It's really helped us.
Of course, of course. I think also, I'm very interested in and this is running through our conversation too. What are the different physical forms of memory, right? Because we can't all know everyone's grandmother. We can't all be at every listening session. So there are actually many other ways that memory can be held, expressed, transmitted. And I think that that's just really exciting. And I love that you've had a very broad approach to how that can be done.
Yes, indeed. Just when you said that, I was thinking about my grandmother, who, as I mentioned, her and my grandfather were taken to boarding school when they were 8. My grandfather was from Jemez, my grandmother from Laguna. And my grandmother, when they would take kids, Indian kids, to these boarding schools, they weren't working to turn out the next, inventor or scientist or doctor. They were there to they wanted the kids to be servants to the rich white folks in certain areas. And so they taught them to iron and to wash clothes and to clean the church and to repair things, to farm and grow food and things of that nature. So my grandmother would wake up, because we lived with her quite often. When my dad went overseas, my mother would move us home to live with my grandparents, whether it was in Winslow, where they were further assimilated into off of their communities to work on the railroad, or whether it was at Mesita Village. My grandmother woke up at like 5 before the sun, 5:30 every morning. She would have her entire house cleaned spick and span by 7. I mean, she was just, you couldn't sit on the couch because you would mess it up. You couldn't, she was clean beyond anything I could imagine. And she wasn't relaxed about it. I just believe those are her physical memories from her time in boarding school, right? I mean, when you mention that, I think it takes on many forms. And for some people, they lived it for many decades after they came home, just because it was probably, in many instances, it was literally beat into them.
Yeah. And what you're saying, that's so very important, because I think that sometimes even when you hear boarding school, you think something fancy, something empowering, right? But assimilation is not opportunity. Assimilation is not empowerment. What are people being prepared to do, and how are they being prepared to understand themselves? So even boarding school itself feels like a misnomer. When you think about what, in the best instance, even school should be empowering, but that's not what this was. Yeah.
Yes, yes, indeed. My grandfather, sometimes I like to share this. My grandfather from Jemez, he spoke 4 languages, probably 4.5. He was an artist, an athlete. He was a diesel train mechanic. He did things like he started the first all-Indian baseball team in Winslow, and he started along with one of the guys from the railroad, the Santa Fe Indian Band. He started that, and they marched in Eisenhower's inauguration. They got on the train in Winslow and got off at every stop and played a mini concert for people at the train depot. But he was a brilliant man. I mean, anyone that could speak 4 languages. Toa from Jemez, Karis, he spoke my grandmother's language. He spoke English. He could speak some Navajo, and he spoke Spanish too, because you had to be able to speak Spanish in New Mexico to be able to communicate with the other communities around. And so he was a brilliant man. And you think if we had a kid like that in our family now, he'd be going to, an Ivy League school and getting a doctorate from someplace, pretty fancy. And back then he had opportunities to be a diesel train mechanic because those were the jobs that they felt Native Americans should have. And so if anything, if we've learned anything, certainly, yes, education is important. Your own version of education, right? Native American Indian schools now, and we run some of these through the Bureau of Indian Education, are run by Native folks for Native children. And they incorporate so much of the culture and tradition into the actual learning at school. And so I'm really happy that things have changed, right? We have learned lessons from the past. And so we'll keep just moving those forward.
There are so many wonderful audience questions. And so I want to turn to a few of those, even though there are more things I want to ask you about. Let's start with, this is from Teresa Coble, who is writing from St. Louis, Missouri. And she asks, how do you foresee elevating the story of the history and contributions of women and girls of all backgrounds via federal parks, lands, and programs in the future?
Oh, yes. Well, that's an awesome question because President Biden just signed an executive order for us to do a theme study on women's contributions to our country, because we don't talk enough about women. And I will say that I recently returned from Maine. I went to the home of Frances Perkins, our first woman secretary, cabinet secretary. She was the labor secretary under FDR. And she, I like to say she was responsible for the 40-hour work week, for Social Security, for Medicare, for all of the things that we see now as foundational to any worker's benefits. And so she served for 12 years under FDR. And so she is one of the, she's part of the work that we're doing to lift up women. But absolutely, there's so many women who deserve to be honored and remembered for the value that they brought to our country and why we are who we are right now. Yes.
Here is a question from Allison Lork, who asks, do you see opportunities, and this sort of picks up with a little bit of what we talked about earlier, do you see opportunities for performing visual artists to engage with the public via our national parks? Not just performances or exhibitions, but perhaps through workshops that are part of our performing arts ecosystem.
Sure.
So yeah.
Well, right off the bat, I think about Wolf Trap. Wolf Trap National Park is, it has a full-blown theater, amphitheater, and there are great artists who come and perform there. Big names. I saw Patti LaBelle there, and I saw Patti LaBelle there a couple months ago. And as well as I've seen, the children's ballet theater there as well. So there's places like that. And, we try to lift up artists.
Wolf Trap is under the Department of the Interior?
Yes, Wolf Trap is a National Park unit.
I did not know that. Wow. I saw Harry Belafonte there when I was growing up.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, that's great. That would have been amazing. We also, I mean, there's if you go to New Orleans, we also have the Jean Lafitte. It's right there in the heart of the Canal Street area. They have artists in residence there who play music out in the courtyard every afternoon, and there's a whole museum on the history of jazz and music in the New Orleans area. That's very interesting. As far as art goes, I was in Olympic Park, and one of the rangers decided to, start this program where, because Olympic is home to glaciers, and with climate change, so many of the glaciers are receding. And so she started this program where artists could submit art that went to that idea. And so artists all over, there were artists overseas who sent in pieces of art to, it was a poem written in the shape of a glacier, or this one artist asked for different sizes of leaves, and she painted glaciers on these leaves, a big leaf with a big glacier all the way down to the small leaf where the glacier had receded. It was really an amazing and very moving. I mean, I cried when I saw the art that people had sent in. So we think that our national parks, our other public lands, go hand in hand with art. Art is such an incredibly powerful and important expression, whether it's performing or otherwise. We support it in every way that we can.
Beautiful. Yeah, I am within the Department of Interior itself, the building. It was such a wonderful discovery to see how much remarkable art and native art there is from under its auspices. I also think now I'm thinking, and I'm seeing there's some people in the chat who are talking about work that our current poet laureate Ada Limon is doing. So now I'm thinking there should be a poetry in residence program nested in Interior.
That would be great.
Okay, good. Ideas. Now here's another question. This one is from Mariah Clark, who is writing from Sacaton, Arizona. And Mariah asks, what is a piece of advice that has stuck with you or impacted you throughout your career?
Well, I think I have some like super simple advice, right? And sometimes it rings pretty true. This woman told me one time, never stand when you can sit, right? Like that, very practical advice, because you never know how long you'll be standing somewhere, right? So I think that's a time tested thing for me. And actually it's caused me to shy away from high heels in many instances, right? Opt for comfortable shoes. But I mean, I don't know. I've had so much wonderful advice from so many people, college professors, law professors, elderly folks in my community. I hear that all the time. One piece of advice that my aunt told me is be nice to everyone. She was, she was the type of auntie that always had candy in her purse. So when she would see a child somewhere, she could give him a piece of candy. She always had a smile on her face and always was just really wanted to show the best of herself. And I think that, we're in a world that's so cynical sometimes. And when I'm out there and you look at the headlines, and there was another mass shooting, for example, in Georgia yesterday. It's very, we can be cynical about the lives we're or the time we're living in, or we can take it upon ourselves to be kind and to be nice to everyone, whether they deserve it or not, whether we're in a good mood or not, whether we're upset or angry about something else. We can always be kind. We can always be nice to someone. We can always show the best version of ourselves. So I think of all the advice that I've had, that one from my aunt has really proven important.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Well, I think that, you know, what the way you approach this work is showing us is that sometimes history and storytelling can be silenced, it can be deferred, but it is never lost. And I think that the power of the way that you are leading in this position is for all of these people who have carried history for so long, that you have given opportunity and form for it not to be lost and for it to be brought into something that can be held collectively. And I think that is tremendously, tremendously powerful. And really couldn't be more important. So we are there is still much conversation going on in the chat, many things we didn't get to. We didn't get to talk about Bears Ears. We didn't get to talk about so many things. But we can have this be an installment on many conversations to come. And I know that for this wonderful audience, you'll keep sharing information and doing your good work. And we are just so grateful that you came to talk to us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And to everyone who joined the program today, we thank you. We thank you for your energy, for your spirit, for your keen attention. And we look forward to seeing you at our next Mellon virtual event, Creativity and Cultures in the Borderlands, on Tuesday, October 22nd at 4 p.m. Eastern. I'll be speaking with the public servant and chief executive officer of the Latino Community Foundation, Julian Castro. We'll be talking with scholar, writer, and Indigenous rights advocate, Dr. Patricia Gonzalez, and Sundance Award-winning filmmaker, Cristina Ibarra. So these wonderful conversations connect to each other and just keep flowing. So we'll see you on the 22nd. Once again, my heart to you, Secretary Haaland, with gratitude, and to everyone, be well and thank you. Bye-bye.